The mistake lasted only 3 seconds, but it changed the direction of 2 lonely lives forever. As we stood in the bright living room of a charming white house outside Nashville, an elderly couple smiled warmly, looked at us, and congratulated us on finding such a beautiful home together. Before I could explain that the woman beside me was only my realtor, she looked at me with gentle eyes, smiled without hesitation, and quietly said, "Not yet." The room filled with awkward laughter, but something inside me stopped moving. Have you ever heard someone say something so unexpected that it reached a place in your heart you had buried years ago? If you had spent years believing happiness belonged to everyone except you, would you have laughed it off, or would you secretly wonder if fate had whispered something through a stranger's mistake? My name is Nathan, and at 38, I had become an expert at pretending life was fine. After losing my wife, Rebecca, to a sudden illness 4 years earlier, every day became another carefully organized routine designed to avoid feeling anything. I worked as an electrician in Tennessee, paid my bills on time, smiled when people expected it, and returned every evening to a small apartment that felt quieter than any place should. Friends encouraged me to start over, but they didn't understand that grief doesn't disappear because the calendar changes. It simply learns to hide behind ordinary moments. Eventually my landlord announced he was selling the building, forcing every tenant to move. I wasn't looking for a fresh start. I was simply looking for another roof over my head. That search introduced me to Rachel, a local realtor known throughout the area for treating clients like neighbors instead of commissions. She was 35, kind without being overly cheerful, and carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had also survived disappointments. She never asked uncomfortable questions, never pushed expensive homes, and somehow noticed when silence was more comforting than conversation. During our first few showings she focused entirely on the properties, but little by little our conversations drifted toward ordinary life. She spoke about growing up in Kentucky, helping care for her aging father, and rebuilding her career after a painful divorce that had left her questioning her own worth. There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet acceptance that life sometimes breaks people before teaching them how strong they really are. Weekend after weekend we visited homes across small American neighborhoods filled with front porches, maple trees, and children riding bicycles. Some houses looked perfect but felt empty. Others were affordable but needed more repairs than I could handle alone. Rachel never rushed me. She believed a house wasn't just walls and windows. It was where someone finally allowed themselves to breathe again. I didn't realize those words were meant for me as much as for the search itself. Then came the Saturday that neither of us would ever forget. The open house sat on a peaceful street where neighbors waved from their gardens. Sunlight poured through large windows, filling every room with warmth. The elderly couple who mistook Rachel for my wife had no idea how deeply their innocent assumption would echo long after they left. Rachel's soft reply, "Not yet," wasn't planned or calculated. She immediately apologized once we were alone, embarrassed by her own words. But strangely, I wasn't embarrassed. For the first time since Rebecca's passing, I caught myself imagining a future that included another person. That realization frightened me almost as much as it comforted me. The weeks that followed became emotionally complicated. Every home tour carried unspoken questions neither of us dared ask. I worried that smiling too often would somehow betray the memory of the woman I had loved. Rachel quietly struggled with her own fears, believing another failed relationship might prove she wasn't meant to be loved again. We remained professional, but our conversations became warmer. We laughed over crooked kitchen cabinets, admired old oak trees in backyards, and shared coffee after appointments without calling them dates. Sometimes healing begins so slowly that you don't recognize it until you realize your heart has stopped expecting loneliness. One rainy afternoon we visited an older farmhouse that needed extensive repairs. Most buyers walked away after seeing the cracked porch and faded paint, but Rachel noticed something different. She pointed toward a small garden filled with wildflowers growing despite years of neglect. She quietly remarked that some beautiful things simply wait for someone willing to care again. Her words weren't really about flowers. They weren't really about the house either. They were about both of us. Standing there beneath gray skies, I finally admitted how terrified I had been of loving someone after loss. I confessed that grief had convinced me moving forward meant leaving Rebecca behind. Rachel listened without interruption before gently reminding me that love doesn't replace love. The heart simply grows larger than we ever believed possible. Months later I purchased that farmhouse. Friends questioned the decision because it required so much work, but every repaired board felt strangely symbolic. Together Rachel and I spent weekends painting walls, planting flowers, replacing broken fences, and slowly transforming the neglected property into a welcoming home. My neighbors assumed she already lived there. We smiled but never corrected them. There was no need to rush what was naturally finding its place. As autumn painted the Tennessee hills with brilliant colors, Rachel invited me to dinner with her father. Watching the older man thank me for making his daughter smile again revealed something I hadn't noticed before. Her laughter had become brighter, and somehow mine had returned as well. Grief hadn't disappeared. Rebecca's photographs still stood proudly on a shelf inside my home, and Rachel never asked me to remove them. Instead, she often paused beside those memories with quiet respect, understanding that honoring yesterday never prevents someone from embracing tomorrow. Nearly a year after that unforgettable open house, we returned to the same neighborhood for a community charity event. By complete coincidence, the same elderly couple recognized us. This time they smiled knowingly before asking whether we had finally found the right house together. Rachel reached for my hand naturally, without hesitation. Before I could answer, I looked at the woman who had patiently helped me rebuild far more than a home. I remembered the first time she had smiled and whispered those unforgettable words. This time, instead of laughing awkwardly, I simply nodded. She had been right all along. Not yet had quietly become right now. If this story moved your heart, tell us in the comments about a moment when hope unexpectedly found you after loss. Sometimes the greatest blessings don't arrive with certainty. They begin as simple misunderstandings, quiet acts of kindness, and people who choose to stay when life has taught us to expect everyone else to leave. And if this story truly touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so more people can be reminded that second chances often begin when we least expect them.